Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it was a mutual, respectful goodbye and smiled while she packed her things. That word, respectful, kept echoing in my head long after the front door closed behind her. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something colder, like standing outside your own house, realizing someone else now lives there. We didn't fight that day. No tears, no slammed doors. Just her voice, steady, polite, as she explained that we'd grown apart. I watched her fold the last of her clothes into a suitcase, the same way she used to fold my shirts when she cared. There was a kind of elegance in the way she detached herself, almost like she was rehearsing for an audience. She said she needed space, time to rediscover who she was. I nodded, told her I understood. She smiled like I'd just proven her point. When the door clicked shut, the silence was surgical, clean, precise. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the outline of her perfume bottle on the dresser. For years, that scent, Chanel, faint but sharp, had been part of my mornings. Now it just hovered in the air like a ghost that hadn't realized it was gone. That night, I went out with my friend Mike, the kind of guy who always says too much but somehow gets it right. We sat in a booth at a dim bar downtown, the kind that smells like whiskey and regret. He asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He laughed and told me I didn't look like it. Then he said something that stuck with me. You'll see who she really is when she sees who you become without her. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Somewhere inside, I knew he was right. Over the next week, I moved differently. Quieter. More deliberate. I didn't text her. Didn't stalk her Instagram. Didn't ask mutual friends what she was doing. I started running before sunrise, stopped drinking, fixed my sleep, even got a new haircut. Small things. But every one of them chipped away at the version of me she'd left behind. She'd told her friends it was mutual, that we were both ready to move on. But the truth was, she needed to believe that lie more than I did. She called it a respectful goodbye. I called it clarity. A few weeks later, I ran into her by accident. Starbucks, of all places. She was with someone, new guy, confident smile, arm around her waist. She looked right at me and froze. I just nodded once, took my coffee, and walked out without a word. For the first time, she looked like the one who'd been left behind. Seeing her that morning didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It was strange, like watching an old movie you used to love but can't connect to anymore. She looked good, of course. She always did. But there was something in her eyes when they met mine, something she hadn't planned for. That quick flicker of recognition, the split-second panic of realizing I wasn't the same man she'd left. I didn't look back when I walked out. I didn't need to. The power had already shifted. After that day, I poured myself into everything I'd neglected while trying to hold us together. Work, the gym, my music. The version of me that used to bend to make her comfortable was gone. I started going out more, reconnecting with people I'd pushed away. Even Mike noticed the change. He said I seemed lighter, sharper, like I'd finally stepped out of someone else's shadow. He wasn't wrong. Weeks passed. Her name stopped showing up in my notifications. Mutual friends mentioned her sometimes, but their tone had changed. They said she seemed off, restless, distracted. Apparently, the new guy wasn't the fairy tale she'd hoped for. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. But I won't lie. Part of me felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was learning what peace actually looked like, and it wasn't chaos disguised as freedom. One evening, Mike convinced me to join a small group dinner. A friend of his named Hannah was there, smart, calm, the kind of person who listens more than she talks. We ended up sitting next to each other. She laughed at my dry humor, and I realized how long it had been since I'd seen someone smile at me without calculation. She wasn't performing. She was present. The next day, I got a text from her. Nothing dramatic, just, "Good conversation last night. Would like to continue it sometime." It was the kind of message that doesn't demand attention. It earns it. I didn't reply immediately. I let it sit. Not out of game playing, but out of patience. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing validation. I was choosing peace. A week later, I saw my ex again, this time at a friend's birthday. She noticed me before I noticed her. And in that instant, I understood what Mike meant months ago. Because when her eyes followed the woman standing beside me, the one who laughed easily and didn't need attention to feel seen, I saw the exact moment her respectful goodbye turned into her biggest regret. And I didn't have to say a word. It's strange how someone can still look the same, but feel completely different. That's what hit me that morning when I caught her reflection in the mirror. Her routine makeup, her same old perfume, her usual white Starbucks cup sitting on the counter. But there was something hollow behind her eyes. It wasn't guilt. It was confusion. Like she couldn't figure out when the control had slipped out of her hands. By then, the silence had become its own kind of language. She started asking questions she never used to ask. Little ones, like whether I wanted dinner or if I'd be home late. The kind of domestic filler we used to share effortlessly. I'd answer politely, without warmth. No edge, no tone, just precision. And that bothered her more than any argument could have. At work, Mike stopped by my desk one afternoon. "You good, man?" he asked, his voice careful. I gave him the same calm smile I'd perfected. Never better. He didn't buy it, but he didn't push. He'd seen the ring disappear from my finger weeks ago. I wasn't hiding it, just not explaining it. That weekend, she asked if I'd help her with something. Fixing a shelf, of all things. It was the first time she'd asked for my help in months. I told her sure, but when I came home Saturday, she'd already done it. Badly. The screws crooked, the wood splintered. She pretended it didn't bother her, but I saw it. That small flicker of frustration that comes from realizing independence isn't as empowering as it sounds when no one's watching. That night, she sat on the couch with her laptop, scrolling through old photos. I saw one pop up. Us in New Orleans, laughing under a neon sign, my arm around her shoulders. She looked at it too long. Then she locked the screen like it burned. The next morning, she left early. I didn't ask where she was going. I just noticed her perfume was heavier than usual. The same scent she used to wear when she wanted to be noticed. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. A friend from her yoga group sent me a screenshot of an Instagram story. Her, laughing at a rooftop bar, a man's arm barely visible at her waist. Half a frame, half a secret. I stared at it for a while, not angry, not jealous, just detached. She wanted freedom. She was getting it. That evening, when she came home, she was too quiet, too careful. She asked if I wanted to watch a movie, something mindless, something she knew I liked. I told her I'd already seen it. She nodded slowly, pretending not to care, but I caught her reflection in the dark window. The expression on her face wasn't indifference anymore. It was fear, and that's when I knew the silence had done its job. The next few days felt like a movie I'd already seen, predictable, quiet, and just a little bit sad. She moved around the house like someone who had lost the rhythm of her own routine. I could feel her eyes on me in the mornings, searching for signs of the man she used to know, or maybe the one she thought she could control. But that man was gone. One evening, I came home later than usual. She was sitting at the dining table with 2 plates already set, candles flickering, her phone face down for once. The food looked good, too good. She'd never been the cooked dinner from scratch type. I walked in, said nothing, took off my jacket, and sat down across from her. She smiled carefully and said she thought we could reconnect. The word hung in the air like perfume, pleasant, but artificial. I ate in silence. She talked the entire time, filling every pause like she was trying to drown out something louder than words. When dinner was over, she asked if I'd like to take a walk. I said I was tired. The flicker in her eyes was small but visible, that familiar frustration of someone losing ground. I thanked her for the meal, placed my plate in the sink, and went upstairs. No anger, no tension, just calm, deliberate distance. The next morning, I left early. I grabbed a black coffee from Starbucks and drove with no destination. The city looked different now, sharper, quieter, almost clean. I parked near the lake and sat there for a long time, watching the water. That's when my phone buzzed, a message from Mike. He'd seen her, not by accident. He worked near the same rooftop bar from that photo. He said she looked tense, scanning the room like she expected me to walk in. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That night, when I got home, she was waiting in the living room again. No makeup this time. Just sweatpants and silence. She asked where I'd been. I said out. She asked with who. I said, people. The pause that followed felt heavy enough to bend the air. She didn't know how to respond to that kind of calm. She wanted an argument, something messy, something she could label as my fault. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. She started to say something, but stopped halfway, realizing it didn't matter anymore. Then she turned off the lights and went upstairs. I stayed behind, watching her shadow disappear down the hallway. She thought walking away from me would set her free. But she never expected that when I finally let go, she'd be the one left trying to hold on. It was subtle at first, the way she started reaching for me again. Not physically, but through the little things she used to take for granted. She started making coffee in the mornings, even though she didn't drink it. She'd leave a cup by the counter for me, like muscle memory she was trying to revive. I never refused it, but I didn't thank her either. My silence became her new mirror, and every reflection showed her less and less of who she used to be. That weekend, I went to a friend's gathering downtown. Nothing fancy, just a few of us catching up, laughing, sharing stories over food and noise. For the first time in a long time, I felt weightless. I wasn't thinking about what she was doing or how she might react if I came home late. My world had expanded again, and I could see it on the faces around me. They noticed. I wasn't the same. When I got back home, she was still awake, sitting on the couch with the TV muted, pretending to scroll through her phone. The look on her face when I walked in told me everything. She'd checked my location, probably scrolled through my tagged photos, looking for proof of something that wasn't there. But the absence of guilt, my calm, was worse than any confession. She asked if I'd had a good night. I said I did. She asked who was there. I told her it was a mix of people from work. That was it. She nodded, her jaw tight, pretending not to care while her eyes gave her away completely. Over the next few days, the atmosphere shifted again. She started trying to start conversations about us. Not fights, not accusations, just soft, half-hearted attempts to get me to say something, anything. "Do you think we're okay?" she asked once. I looked up from my laptop and said, "I think we're quiet." That was all. She smiled weakly, but her eyes went dim. I noticed she started staying home more, canceling plans, wearing the perfume I used to compliment. Her phone, once glued to her hand, now sat face down beside her. She was finally learning what real silence feels like, the kind that doesn't protect you, but exposes you. A few nights later, Mike called. He'd seen her again. This time, she wasn't with anyone, just sitting alone at that same rooftop bar, nursing a drink she'd barely touched. He said she looked lost. I didn't ask for details. I just said, "People always find what they deserve," and hung up. That night, she climbed into bed beside me and whispered goodnight for the first time in months. I didn't reply, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who broke you is to let them drown in the quiet they created. The shift was almost invisible at first, but it was there. She started paying attention again. To me, to the small things she'd ignored for months. The way I folded my sleeves, the music I played in the car, even how I smiled at strangers. It wasn't affection. It was study. She was trying to remember how I'd slipped out of her hands so quietly. I didn't change anything. I just stopped making myself available. My phone stayed silent when hers buzzed. My words became shorter, measured, impossible to twist. She used to love being the center of every conversation, but now she was orbiting mine, trying to decode the calm she once mistook for weakness. One morning, I came downstairs and found her cooking breakfast. Real breakfast. Pancakes, eggs, the whole thing. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and syrup, the kind of comfort she never bothered with before. She said she wanted to do something nice for me. I just nodded, poured myself coffee, and sat down. She waited for me to say something, to show some reaction, but I didn't give her that. She filled the silence with nervous chatter, asking about work, my plans, my weekend. I answered every question with a single word. The more I said nothing, the more she talked. And the more she talked, the more her voice started to tremble. Later that day, I met up with Mike. He said she'd texted his girlfriend, asked if I was seeing someone. Apparently, she was trying to be casual about it, pretending she was just curious. I laughed, told him to leave it alone. But inside, I knew what was happening. She was starting to lose control of the story she built. That night, she came into my office while I was working. She stood there for a minute before saying she missed how we used to talk. I looked up and told her quietly, "That version of us doesn't exist anymore." She froze, not expecting the bluntness. Then she said something soft, almost pleading, something about trying again, fixing things. I didn't argue, didn't comfort. I just looked at her and said, "Some things don't need fixing. They need to end." Her face fell, not because of anger, but because she realized I meant it. She left the room without another word, but I could hear her crying quietly in the hallway. I didn't follow. The next morning, she was gone before sunrise. Her side of the bed empty, but her perfume lingered faintly in the air. I stood there, staring at the space she left behind, and felt nothing but peace. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was closure. She was gone for 3 days. No calls, no messages, not even a shadow of her online. The first day felt strange, like walking through a house that had been stripped of its echo. By the second, it felt lighter, quieter. By the third, I didn't even notice the silence anymore. It had become my normal. When she finally came back, it was unannounced. I heard the sound of her keys hitting the counter and the faint shuffle of her suitcase wheels on the floor. She looked different, tired, fragile in a way I hadn't seen before. She said she needed space to think. I just nodded and kept sipping my coffee. Her eyes searched for something in me. Anger, relief, anything she could use to reattach herself. But there was nothing. She was standing in the ruins of something she'd set on fire herself, and all she could see was the smoke. She started talking fast, explaining things I hadn't asked about. How she realized she'd been selfish. How she thought time apart would reset us. She said she'd been staying with a friend, but the way her voice cracked told me there was more to it. I didn't push. I didn't need to. I'd learned that silence forces truth faster than confrontation ever could. Later that evening, I went out to meet Mike. He noticed the calm on my face before I said a word. "She's back?" he asked. I nodded. He smirked. And I told him it didn't matter anymore. He raised his glass and said, "Then you finally get it." When I came home, she was waiting again, this time in my hoodie, sitting on the couch with the TV off. The gesture would have worked once. It didn't now. She asked if we could talk. I said we already had. She insisted there was more to say. I told her the problem wasn't words, it was meaning. Her eyes welled up, but I didn't flinch. She had cried before, but those tears used to pull me in. Now they just reminded me of every apology that came too late. As I walked past her, she whispered that I didn't even look at her the same way anymore. I stopped, turned slightly, and said, "That's because I don't see the same person anymore." She broke then, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet collapse, the kind that doesn't need sound to feel heavy. I didn't stay to watch. I went upstairs, closed the door, and let the silence swallow her words. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The morning after she came back, the air in the house felt different. Not tense exactly, just hollow. I could hear her moving around quietly downstairs, like she was afraid of waking something that couldn't be fixed. When I walked into the kitchen, she had breakfast waiting. Pancakes again, coffee brewed just the way I used to like it. She said she thought we could start fresh. I didn't sit down. I just nodded, thanked her once, and walked out the door. Her eyes followed me all the way to the sound of the closing door. At work, I found myself unusually focused. Numbers, meetings, projects, it all came easily. Mike stopped by my office and asked if I was okay. I told him I was. He smiled and said, "You look like a man who finally stopped fighting a storm." He was right. The difference between pain and peace is that peace doesn't need to announce itself. That evening, when I came home, she was sitting on the porch with her laptop open but untouched. The sun was setting, and for a moment, she looked small, like someone who'd run out of plans. She told me she'd talked to her mother that day. Apparently, her mom had asked why I didn't come around anymore. She said she didn't know what to tell her. I said maybe the truth would be a good start. She looked down, then asked if I still believed we could fix what we had. I said quietly, "You can't rebuild something you never respected." She didn't speak after that. Over the next week, she tried again, little gestures this time. Music playing softly in the kitchen, a hand brushing against mine as we passed, a hesitant laugh at old memories. But I wasn't the same man anymore. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't reachable either. The version of me that once tried to hold everything together was gone. Then came the night she broke the silence. She admitted she'd been seeing someone during our separation. She said it didn't mean anything, that she'd been confused, scared, lost. She wanted forgiveness, but I saw it for what it was, her final attempt to test if she still had power over me. I looked at her and said, "You can't lose what you already gave away." Her face crumbled in a way I'll never forget. She whispered that she was sorry, but it didn't matter. Some things don't deserve closure, They deserve distance. That night, I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and left without another word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even look back. Because when you finally outgrow the version of yourself that begged to be understood, walking away doesn't feel like loss. It feels like freedom. I didn't go far that night, just enough distance to breathe. I found a small Airbnb on the edge of town, the kind of place that smells like old wood and clean sheets. It was quiet there, and that quiet wasn't heavy like the silence at home. It was peaceful. I made myself coffee, opened the windows, and let the night air fill the room. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, just stillness. I didn't text her. I didn't call. I didn't check social media to see what she'd post or how she'd frame the story. I was done being someone's storyline. Mike came by a few days later, dropped off a few of my things, and looked at me like he was seeing a new person. He said I looked lighter. I told him that's what happens when you stop carrying someone else's chaos. He laughed, then said she'd been asking about me. Apparently, she'd been calling mutual friends, pretending it was casual, but the pattern was clear. She wasn't looking for information. She was looking for reassurance. She wanted to know I was still orbiting around her. I wasn't, and that's what scared her. One evening, I drove by the house, not to see her, but to close the loop. The lights were off except for one in the living room. Through the window, I could see her sitting on the couch, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at nothing. The sight didn't hurt. It didn't even sting. It just felt distant, like watching a stranger living a life I'd already walked away from. Back at the Airbnb, I opened my laptop and started working on a project I'd put off for months. I stayed up until sunrise, lost in the kind of focus that used to come naturally before everything turned emotional. It felt good to be building something again, something that was mine. A few days later, she called. Just once. I let it ring out. No message. No second attempt. That's when I knew she finally understood. This wasn't a pause. It was an ending. Later that week, I got a text from Hannah, the woman I'd met at that dinner months ago. Just a simple, "Hope you're doing well." I smiled for the first time in a long time, not because I wanted something from her, but because I finally had room to want anything at all. Some endings are loud and messy. Mine was quiet, deliberate, and absolute. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped crossing them. It had been a month since I left, and by then, everything that used to hurt had turned into background noise. I'd settled into a rhythm, a quiet, disciplined kind of life. Morning runs, black coffee, long drives with music instead of thoughts. The kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, but you feel it in the way your shoulders finally drop when you exhale. She tried one more time. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting at a cafe downtown, the same one we used to visit before things fell apart. I saw her reflection in the window before I saw her face. She looked hesitant, almost fragile, holding her phone like a shield. I didn't move. She walked up slowly, said she'd been hoping to run into me. I told her I didn't think this was a coincidence. She gave a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. She said she missed me, that she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that she'd changed. I listened, the way you listen to rain, present but untouched. Her words were polished, careful, rehearsed. She said she didn't recognize herself anymore without me. I told her quietly that's because the version of me she used to know doesn't exist anymore. Her eyes filled, but I didn't flinch. She said she wished we could start over. I told her I had started over. It just didn't include her this time. For a moment, she just stood there, silent. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You're not the same man I left." I smiled and said, "That's the point." She stayed a few seconds longer, waiting for something. Anger, forgiveness, anything. But I had nothing left to give. Eventually, she walked away, her reflection fading in the glass the same way her voice had faded from my memory. When I left the cafe, the sun was starting to set, washing the city in gold. I got in my car, turned on the radio, and drove with the windows down. The air smelled like rain. My phone buzzed once, a message from Hannah, asking if I wanted to meet for dinner. I smiled, not because of her, but because I was free enough to say yes. I glanced once in the rearview mirror, and for a brief second, I thought about everything that had happened. The noise, the chaos, the silence. Then I said something out loud, not to her, not even to myself, but to the space she used to occupy. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And with that, I kept driving. No anger, No regret, just peace. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.